Leading people well is tough, even in the best of times. But what do we do when it gets really, really tough? How do we as leaders respond to adversity in a healthy and productive way? How can we continue to succeed in business and in life through the storms of leading well? You know, when dangerous storms begin to brew over the horizon, most herd animals and even humans have a tendency to take cover or move away from the storm, but not the buffalo. The buffalo, instead of running for cover, will gather its herd, take a few last bites of whatever food is out there, and head directly through the storm. As leaders, we have to do the same thing. We're all faced with different storms that come with leading well. Modern day leaders face leadership storms that can cripple an individual, a team, or an entire organization. Our guests are resilient leaders, some of the best resilient leaders our country has to offer. They'll walk us through how they actually got through these storms and how they became better on the other side. So join us on the Through the Storm podcast. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Through the Storm podcast. My name is Dr. Travis Hearne, and I am honored to be able to have an amazing guest today. You know, this podcast, we talk about going through leadership storms. We talk about going through hard things as leaders, and how do we do that, and how do we come out on the other side more equipped to go into the next storm. And my next guest has been through so many storms, and I am honored to be able to have him on the show. So over the past 15 years, General Petraeus was named one of America's 25 best leaders by U.S. News and World Report, a runner-up for Time Magazine's Person of the Year, the Daily Telegraph Man of the Year, a Time 100 selectee, Princeton University's Madison Medalist, and one of Foreign Policy Magazine's top 100 public intellectuals in 3 different years. General Petraeus is currently a partner with the global investment firm KKR and the chairman of the KKR Global Institute, which he established in May of 2013. He is also a member of the board of directors of Optiv and FirstStream, a venture investor in more than 15 startups, and engaged in a variety of academic endeavors. Prior to joining KKR, General Petraeus, and this part really hits home to me, served over 37 years in the United States military, specifically in the Army, culminating his career with 6 consecutive commands, 5 of which were in combat, including command of the 101st Airborne Division during the fight to Baghdad in the first year in Iraq, command of the Multinational Security Transition Command in Iraq, command of coalition forces in Iraq during the surge, command of U.S. Central Command, and command of coalition forces in Afghanistan. Following retirement for the military and after Senate confirmation by a vote of 94-0, he served as the director of the CIA during a period of significant achievements in the global war on terror, the establishment of important agency digital initiatives, and significant investments in the agency's most important asset, its human capital. I love that. General Petraeus graduated with distinction from the U.S. Military Academy, and he is the only person in Army history, and you can fact check this, to be the top graduate of both the demanding U.S. Army Ranger School and the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. He also earned his PhD from Princeton University's School of Public and International Affairs. He is currently the visiting fellow at Yale's University Jackson Institute, co-chairman of the Global Advisory Council of the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars, senior vice president of the Royal United Service Institute, and a member of the Trilateral Commission, as well as a member of the boards of the Atlantic Council, the Institute of Study of War, and over a dozen veteran service organizations. General Petraeus has earned numerous awards and decorations, including 4 Defense Distinguished Service Medals, the Bronze Star with the V for Valor, 2 NATO Meritorious Service Medals, the Combat Action Badge, the Ranger Tab, the Master Parachutist and Air Assault Badge, which, sir, y'all's air school, you don't treat Marines very well. You beat us up a little bit. But this is one thing that I smiled at and I loved. While in uniform, he is believed to be the only one to have thrown out the first pitch at a World Series game and done the coin toss at the Super Bowl. Sir, I'm honored. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the Through the Storm podcast.
Well, it's great to be with you, shipmate, and thanks in turn for all that you did when you were wearing the uniform of our country, and for all you've done since then.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And like that's one of the reasons that I admire you so. So after reading this book, and I'm only about halfway through it, is this book is Conflict: The Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Ukraine. Sir, this right here that you co-authored is a masterpiece. I love it. But I specifically honed in on the Iraq and Afghanistan piece. So a little bit of background for the listeners. I was in Iraq in 2008, 2009 when we were turning things over to the Iraqis. We were having them lead the way. in that turnover. But in Afghanistan, in southern Helmand province in 2010, it was a different story, sir, as you know. And First Line Armor Reconnaissance Battalion, the battalion that I was with, was in southern Helmand province. We basically took from the Helmand River Bend all the way down to the Pakistani border. And when you talk about it in your book, and I want to read a little bit of an excerpt, Operation Mushtarak. So a little bit from the book here. In the Helmand River Valley, from there, it would spread to the Kandahar province. Initial operations focused on route clearance. However, beginning with the second phase in February, British and U.S. Marine Corps units would maneuver by air to clear select towns, beginning with Marja, which was just north of us, sir, and revitalize local governments to link them with regional and national resources. Few sentences later, despite tactical successes in clearing various towns in Helmand, however, the Taliban did not completely disappear, as many operatives went to ground and others retreated to other districts in Helmand province or to Pakistan, awaiting the day when Americans and their NATO partners would leave. Now, I saw that firsthand in what we called Operation Steel Dawn, was one of our last operations down to Bahram Shah to be able to clear that bazaar. I was leading Marines at a very tactical level. I was leading fire teams, and during that deployment, we lost 3 Marines, and it was, to us, it was, and to many others, it was a tragedy, and it was rough. It was rough time leading in that space. You were leading the entire theater. Now, I would love your perspective when we talk about small unit leadership, like I was doing, and then the strategic involvement that you had, and the strategic planning and innovation that you were going through for the entire theater. I'd love your perspective on the importance of leadership at all different levels during those times.
Well, leadership, the quality of leadership is often what determines the outcome of a conflict. There are different levels of leadership. Obviously, the strategic leader at the top, which is what I was privileged to be in Afghanistan and also in Iraq during the surge. But the same tasks are required of leaders all the way down through the force to your position, presumably as a squad leader. The difference is, and it's an enormous difference, the strategic leader has to perform the first task correctly if the overall endeavor is to have a chance of success. And that first task is to get the big ideas right, to craft the right strategy, to understand all the dynamics at play in the context, the friendly forces, the enemy forces, the different elements in society, how the country is supposed to work, how it really works, the human terrain and the physical terrain, the neighborhood. That was particularly important in Afghanistan, much more so than in Iraq, because of the pernicious activities, frankly, of the neighbor to the east and south, which Pakistan allowed sanctuary for the Taliban in Baluchistan province, just south of the border that you were fighting near, and then in the eastern part of Afghanistan into the tribal areas of Pakistan, in particular North Waziristan and some of the other tribal areas. So at the very top, you have got to get that right. And as the book conveys, often that was not the case. In fact, even in the case of Afghanistan, it took us probably 7 or 8 years to get the right big ideas. And it took 2 more years to get the rest of the inputs right. In other words, the right level of resources almost. And we're not just talking military forces. We're also talking diplomats, spies, development workers, rule of law experts, even finance individuals, to get the right organizational architecture for all of this, to get the preparation of our forces right, and to have the right leaders in place, the ones that really get it about what it is that we were trying to do. So, but again, at that very top, you've got to get the big ideas right. You then have to communicate them effectively through the breadth and depth of the organization. You have to oversee their implementation, provide the example, the energy, the inspiration, hire the great people, hang on to them as long as you can, let those not measuring up to move on to something else. It's the metrics that you use. They have to be the right ones to tell you if we're really making progress or experiencing setbacks. And then it's how the strategic leader uses his or her time. In other words, your battle rhythm, your schedule, because it's all these different meetings and activities and so forth that you engage in that really are the way you drive the implementation of the campaign plan. And then there's a fourth task, determining how you need to refine the big ideas so that you can do it again and again and again. And that is really performed by, again, meetings, events on your schedule that help you perform that task, in some cases force you to make decisions about the big ideas about, I would be told by the strategic planners periodically, sir, if you want to be here 6 months from now, you have to make the decision right now at your level so that it can ripple all the way down to the squad leaders in Southern Helmand Province. So you perform these 4 tasks, but they're very heavily constrained in the first task, getting your big ideas right, because you have a lot of layers above you that are all shaping the space in which, and the latitude that you actually have to exercise that particular task. But at the top, it's a blank slate, and you've got to get this right. And as I said, we often did not. 13 years in Vietnam before finally you had a general who actually understood that we should be seeking to secure the people. You could only do it by living with them and not by thrashing around in the jungle with big units, achieving very ephemeral goals, because the minute you leave an area, the enemy would backfill and you didn't have the right campaign design. And we couldn't win a war of attrition, which is what we were trying to do against a North Vietnamese army that had plenty of recruits they could draw on, and were much less concerned about casualties than were the United States elements. Finally, with General Abrams in late 1968, we crafted the right comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign, incorporating all the embassy elements in the CIA as well, which did one of the critical programs similar to what we did with our joint mission units, the manhunt business, the high value targets, and so forth every night. But we didn't have that all together until that moment. Only the Marines, by the way, with the initiative they were pursuing, actually had the right approach. And even then, General Westmoreland was browbeating them instead of having these little platoon squads and so forth all over the countryside, securing the people, which should have been job one again. Instead of that, he wanted them to consolidate in big units and join the big fight out in the jungles and the highlands and so on, which was not the main effort, should not have been the main effort. And it actually turned a small war into a large war. And in many cases, created more bad guys than we took off the battlefield by the way we conducted operations.
Oh my goodness, sir. Yes. And we saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan, the creating of more bad guys. And stepping back a little bit, when you talk about you have to get the big picture right. That first decision you have to get right. We saw my battalion commander, Colonel Leonard. He used to say that. I don't know if he heard that from you somewhere, but that was his mantra. We have to get the big decision right. We have to be able to make decisions based off of that. And it filtered down all the way to us. And it's such a great way to make decisions. And one follow-up question I have for you, in the business world, which I'm now in, and which you are deeply in, we talk about making the 80%, the decision with 80% of the information. How does that translate to kind of military decisions? How much of the information do you need as a leader to make a decision and move forward?
You need enough, and that varies from situation to situation. Look, you're always making decisions without complete knowledge. It's very seldom that you have total transparency, total insights on a particular situation, a particular operation. So you're always going to have to be making decisions without perfect information, without all that you would like to have. And what you do is you try to get as much as you can. You pursue certain actions to enable you to become better informed. But at the end of the day, you're never going to have everything that you'd like to have. And so there's a moment at which you have to make decisions and move out. And that's what you do.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. And sir, so what I would love to just kind of transition into, sir, you've been through with an amazing military career. You've been through storms. You've been through leadership storms. As a director of the CIA, you've been through storms. I would love for you to just talk about one of the most significant leadership storms that you've been through.
Well, look, the surge in Iraq was an absolutely grinding experience during the first 4 to 6 months. I told Congress during my confirmation hearing that it was going to get much harder before it got easier, because I intended for us to go back into the neighborhoods. Again, the big idea was you secure and serve the people. You can only do that by living with them. We could no longer continue to consolidate on big bases, drive around the neighborhood a couple of times in the morning and the afternoon, go back for dinner in the mess hall, and then do it all again the next day. That was not working. Even when we conducted major clearance operations in the 6 months prior to the surge in Baghdad, you can watch the level of violence. I could literally feel. I can go back and look at those slides still and tell you why it went down or up or whatever in the significant periods. If you're going to drive violence down, and that's what you have to do. If you're going to secure the people, and that's what you have to do, you have to live with them. And then you create gated communities. You use biometric ID cards. All of this kind of technique, and procedure. But it was really hard because, as I told Congress, when we go back into these neighborhoods, there are bad guys that control them. They're going to fight us to retain control. And in fact, the drill that we had as we were establishing 77 additional locations just in the greater Baghdad area was to not only set it all up in a period of darkness, you had to have walls all the way around it, Texas barriers typically, and usually wired together as well or cabled together, because the enemy is very likely going to come at you when the sun comes up with a suicide car bomb attack. And that happened on a couple of occasions. One case, it was two successive. So the first one tries to create a hole, and then the next one is going to exploit it. They didn't, but they tried. So the casualties were very tough. They were the toughest of our time there. Every night you're writing America's mothers and fathers or spouses letters of condolence, going to a lot of memorial services. It's also the summer in Baghdad, of course, is, oppressive, would not do it justice when you're 120 or more degrees and in an area that's humid, because again, it's the land between the rivers, if you will. It's the land of the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. Tigris goes right through Baghdad itself. So all of these reasons made it exceedingly difficult, and again, made this one of those really tough leadership positions.
Yeah, sir. And one of those was I'm writing a chapter in my next book about the second battle of Fallujah in 2004. And when we talk about having to live with the people, but it being completely kind of overrun, I just learning so much from a really good friend of mine during that time.
We won that battle, but we were unable to sustain the success, which is why we had to do it again in the spring of 2007. And the reason is because we did not do what I just described. We didn't clear it painstakingly as much as we should have, and then hold it. So you've got to clear it, then you create, again, gated communities, gated neighborhoods. Fallujah, the last time, I think we created 12 of them. One entry control point. You only can come in and go out if you have a biometric ID card that matches your face. And we then starting slowly to recruit host nation partners, host nation forces, get the police academy going again, all of these actions. But it starts by having enduring security that is sustainable. And to do that, we had to go to some pretty considerable lengths.
Yes, sir. And some of the stories that, he was what was he, a second? I think he was a second lieutenant, first lieutenant. No, he's a first lieutenant. Leading Marines through the streets of Fallujah. And when you talk about having to serve the people and hold and create and live with the people, it's the stories that he tells. It seemed almost impossible to do that. And
well, it wasn't. And they did an extraordinary job. And then they started very quickly. So it's clear, hold, and build. And then immediately with humanitarian assistance and restoration of basic services, then repair of damaged infrastructures, houses, schools, markets, you name it. And then constantly determining how do we need to refine things? How do we make it even better? And telling the people in advance, we're going to make your life better. We're going to get Al-Qaeda out of it. And we sure hope that you will support us at the very least, if not actively engage with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And those stories are intense to say the least, and he did such a great job in explaining how the door-to-door the door-to-door combat, the losing Marines and the losing just what he saw. It's amazing what happened during that time frame. So you talked about, the writing the letters home and how difficult that was. What From that storm that you experienced leading in Iraq, what were some of the lessons that you learned from that time period that you still carry with you today?
Well, there's a number of lessons. I mean, there are lessons about the conduct of comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaigns. Keep in mind that we didn't even have a field manual
Yeah.
for this several years into the war until General Mattis and I got together and produced the Army Marine Corps counterinsurgency manual in less than a year. So now we had the intellectual foundation. It's not to say that people didn't know what they were doing, but some actually did not, and this is a big help. So going through all of this, these challenges, these are very, very considerable. And the casualties are very tough. The pressure from Washington was enormous. I knew I had to go back at the 6-month mark and do a hearing, and I decided the ambassador should come with me, and we'll do the other 2 hearings that so I had to do the Senate Foreign Relations and House committees, and then he had to do the armed services with me. But it was very important that we do that. But there was enormous pressure because of that by the time we go back there, the policy is literally hanging by 1 vote in the Senate, maybe 2. And if we had not produced results, it was entirely possible that there could have been some kind of congressional action to curtail or to control the war and so on. And thankfully, the tide turned. We started driving violence down by about 4 months, then came down substantially. I think it was, 45, 50% by the time of the hearing. And that proved to be very, very important as well. But, you also have congressional delegations that are in there, some of which are taking you on personally. We had challenges with the leadership of Iraq. I remember the prime minister's national security advisor, 3 days into my time back in Iraq, he tells the ambassador he needs to see the 2 of us immediately. He does. He lays out 11 conditions that the prime minister is establishing, and every one of them was contrary to what I intended to do. So that was a pretty big set to. I could feel my blood pressure literally starting, boil inside your body, something I haven't had probably maybe since then, who knows. And I calmly answered and said, "Doctor, if that's what the prime minister is going to do, I'd appreciate if he would convey that to President Bush during the normally scheduled video teleconference, which I'll attend for the first time as the commander of the multinational force. But he should know that if he does that, I'm going to be on the next plane to the United States, and I intend to take the policy with me." That's a big deal. You're 3 days into your time as a 4-star, 3 days into your time as a multinational force Iraq commander, and it was all in. And I went to the meeting the next day. I didn't sleep the night before, and he never mentioned it then, nor did he ever mention it again. And we were able to go on with what it was that we knew we needed to do, which was to reverse what we'd been doing, leaving the neighborhoods, consolidating in big bases, to going back to, again, living with the people together with our Iraqi counterparts, to be sure. So those are big moments. Those are moments that matter. And there often are some of those in these really senior positions, especially the most senior position. But we made mistakes along the way at various times. Our soldiers made mistakes. And again, at the end of that day, if you get knocked down, you got to do a self-assessment, identify what led that to happen, figure out how to learn from it, make amends where that's necessary, talk about it publicly and so forth, and then pick up the rucksack and dust yourself off and keep driving on.
Oh, yes, sir. That's the biggest thing when we talk about the risk that what popped out of me was the risks that you were taking in all of that. And as a leader, having to take risks, getting knocked down, having to pick your pack up, having to dust it off, and then continue to move forward while still taking risk, while still making decisions, while still leading extremely well. And during such a challenging time. I mean, those from 2001 until recently, it's been those conflicts were stressful. I felt my blood. When you hear when you talk about your blood pressure, you can feel it boiling in your body. There's a like it gets a visceral. I can still feel that from some of the things that we were doing in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and beyond. And it's just it's so great to hear your perspective on from your level of leadership and that you were able to take big risks in the book. You highlight the risks that you took. You highlight it's amazing to see the different, from my perspective, from being the guy on the ground, the different strategic decisions that were made, that could have gone one way or the other that would have impacted me directly. Again, when I read this, when I read your chapter on Afghanistan, it was just like it was like I was back there again. So for people listening, pick this book up. It is amazing. It is something that is it's gonna be a textbook for for conflict moving forward. Sir, so one final thing I want to just ask about is, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the current geopolitical situation, but I don't want to talk about it from the lens that most have talked about it most are talking about it today. Given the political landscape, Israel, Iran, Russia, Ukraine, North Korea, you name it. What advice would you give leaders and people of influence who are making decisions that impact outcomes of these different conflicts around the world?
Well, it's sort of trite, but what you have to do is be as absolutely well informed as you possibly can be. You've got to assimilate all information that is out there, assess it, determine how it influences the policies that should be implemented. But it comes down to deep understanding that is founded on decades of similar tasks in some other places, and also deep knowledge of the country at hand, the situation at hand. That is crucial. And you have to go to great lengths to do that. It's a lot of individual hard work because you're the one who has to really understand it. You're the one who's going to make the fundamental decisions on the particular endeavor. And you got to be very careful that that groupthink doesn't set in, that lessons of history that shouldn't influence you do unduly so. All of this, and then I think also leaders should be aware that their soldiers, their Marines, they don't want to be led by somebody who's proud to be average, who is satisfied with a gentleman's B, is too cool for school. I remember going to West Point several times during the war years and explaining to them that you are about to hold the greatest responsibility imaginable as a very young lieutenant, where you'll be responsible for our country's men and women in uniform. And they don't want to be led by somebody who, again, was proud to be average. They want to be led by somebody who has done everything he can to master his particular skill, profession, the tasks involved with that, pushes him or herself, constantly trying to improve, very, very serious about this, highly professional, but is absolutely possible. And again, not sort of joking it off or not being particularly aggressive in trying to achieve excellence. Life is a competitive endeavor, and you don't get a trophy or a T-shirt in the real world just for showing up like a little kid's soccer. But you not only want to be the very best you can be, you want to try to win if you can, but you also want to be the best team player that you could be. You don't want to win by climbing over the backs of your peers, and so I think that's pretty important advice. It's quite general, but when it comes to making the big decisions, it's all about your understanding, your judgment, and so forth. And that is, even AI is not going to replace that anytime soon.
No, sir, that is so important. It's just when you break down leadership and you break down leading well, you can always break it down into what you just said. You have to be willing to work as a team. You have to be willing to be an excellent leader, though. You have to be willing to do the homework, to know where you're coming from, to know where you're going, to have a plan, and to operate within that plan and to move forward.
And physically to be able to lead. There's old saying, it's hard to lead from the rear of the formation. You need to lead. You should strive to be the very best you can be in that physical component as well. I always had competitions, in fact, that I ran in every unit that I was privileged to lead. And I would grade them myself, and I would compete every time myself. And usually was very much up in the top 10, even when I was a 3-star and the Command and General Staff College students were young majors. And of course, I crafted the competition so it played to a few of my strengths. I mean, I would never do iron with some of these guys, but they had to run with me or do pull-ups or dips or abs with me. But again, the idea of really going for it, of really trying to achieve excellence, again, it sounds so obvious, so commonplace, except that I realized at West Point, even a year or two into the wars of the post 9/11 period, there were still folks that were, again, happy to be too cool for school, happy to take the gentleman's B, skate through life, go to the movie that night, and all the rest of this, when they should have been much more diligent, much more intent on developing the skills, knowledge, attribute, and expertise needed to lead small units.
Oh, yes, sir. That's the threat of falling into average. I have 3 boys myself. They are 7, 9, and 11 right now. And I'm gonna wrap us up with this question. And I had this is probably the most important question of the podcast, sir. My son, the 11-year-old, we live in Colorado. We live in Colorado Springs, so the Air Force Academy is right down the street. My son he wants to go to Annapolis with every bone in his body. If you were to try to convince him to go to West Point, what would you tell him?
Well, I think it's any of the service academies, frankly, that these are extraordinary opportunities. They focus on more than just pure academics. There's also obviously a very significant physical component to it. There is a values component. And then, of course, there's a leadership component. And it's not enough to be good in any one of these. You have to be good in all 3 of them if you're going to succeed, I think, as a military leader over time. And so, once again, you're trying to be all that you can be in each of these different areas. And that's pretty important. And while being a good team player, in Ranger School, in my day, there were 3 awards, and I got all 3 of those. But I was particularly proud of one of them, which was essentially the team player award. It was actually a combination of your land navigation scores and your peer ratings. You're rating your peers. How good a ranger buddy is this guy or that guy? And so I got the number 1 overall, and then another award relating to performance, but also, again, recognized for being a good ranger buddy. And that had a variety of manifestations, including carrying my ruck and my ranger buddy's ruck up, I think it was Dahlonega Mountain, one of these pretty substantial mountains in North Georgia in the winter, below freezing. So, among others, again, you're just trying to help everybody get through, to make way together, to give energy when that's needed, to provide inspiration, to step up when that is called for. So that's, I think, the big advice. As to the service academies, again, I'm sort of agnostic on those. Our son did MIT ROTC, in fact, and then served 8 years in the Army, including rifle platoon leader with the 173rd Airborne Brigade in the tough part of Wardak Province when I was the commander. And then he went to Special Ops and did several more tours of Ranger Recon and then some other Ranger elements. By the way, his wife was under a rucksack as a female engagement team leader, having graduated from Harvard and then subsequently doing a Rhodes Scholarship. So they're pretty impressive couple. He then did Harvard Law School, Harvard Business School, and wants to go back to government service as an assistant U.S. attorney.
Man, that's excellence right there. You talk about excellence. Yeah,
it is. It is. And she's on her 2nd startup, and the valuation is very encouraging.
Oh man, they're running fast. I love that. Yeah, that's amazing. No, sir, I'm grateful for the time that I get to spend with you today, just talking about, people being good leaders. I mean, when I'm in my 40s and I'm trying to, my biggest thing is to be able to spread the word that leadership saves lives. Good leadership can save lives. I've seen it happen. And it's all about exactly what you talked about, everything that you spoke about today, as far as leading people, being ready for it, taking charge, being a team player, making sure that you're physically prepared, making like all of the things that we need as leaders to be able to do our jobs well, to literally save people's lives. And I'm seeing that in the business world. I'm seeing that in our veteran community as well. Yes, sir.
There's another adage that I'd want to share, and that is because, in fact, people would say Petraeus was lucky. He had this, and then that led to that, and then he ends up, he's commanding the surge and these other things. But it was just luck. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and you spend your entire life preparing for opportunities that may or may not come along. And in my case, it was two opportunities to command actual wars at the height of them, and then, of course, the agency and others, and even at KKR, one of the greatest investment firms in the entire world, is another extraordinary opportunity. But I literally spent a lifetime preparing for what ultimately did present itself. And I took that really seriously. In fact, one time when I was up jumping with the British parachute regiment as a young lieutenant, I was in Vicenza, Italy, with at that time an airborne battalion combat team. And so we made 4 or 5 jumps from a balloon in the morning, and my counterpart, British lieutenant, who was escorting me, if you will, said, do you want to go to the pub this afternoon, cultural experience? I said, sure, but let's stop at that little military sales store on the way that I understand is run by the former regimental sergeant major. He said, sure. So we go in, our major's there, and he said, oh, lieutenants, what can I do for you? And I said, I was wondering if you had any used field marshal's batons. And it was because, remember that old adage, that old saying of Napoleon, that any corporal can be called on for field marshal at any given time, and you need to be ready. And so I wanted literally to put one in my rucksack so that every time I felt in there, I'd be reminded, you got to be ready. He said, oh, fresh out of those, mate, but I do have this little swagger stick. And so I took it, and I used 550 cord, that green cord, to tie it to my rucksack frame. Nobody really knew it was there because it was sort of covered over. And of course, I had the right knots and they were burned off and so on. But I knew it was there. And every time I picked up that rucksack, it would remind me, you got to be ready. The call could come, Petraeus for field marshal any moment now. But, and again, I'm joking about it. And I did sort of joke about it a bit, except that I also took it pretty seriously and really tried to apply myself. I also always sought out of my intellectual comfort zone experiences. I went to Princeton, did a PhD instead of going at that time. It was the Ranger Regiment, which is what I really wanted to do. But I was persuaded that I should raise my intellectual sights farther than the maximum effective range of an M60 machine gun. And then always tried to do the path not taken. I didn't do the war college. I did a fellowship at Georgetown. I didn't finish the fellowship. I became the chief of operations for the United Nations force in Haiti, a tremendous experience. So always that. And that is what really helped me be prepared for some of these opportunities that did come along, really starting, I think, with the command of the 101st Airborne Division, not just to fight to Baghdad, which was somewhat conventional, but then what became a counterinsurgency campaign, and knowing what we needed to do. I'd studied it. I'd written my dissertation about it. I had been really quite determined to try to understand these complex dynamics that are the essence of counterinsurgency campaigns. And therefore we had a lot of latitude. I wasn't getting any guidance from above at that point in time. In fact, the Pentagon didn't want to recognize that it was a counterinsurgency. So again, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And people should take that very, very seriously as well.
That is so good. The luck is what happens when that is, all of us have a certain amount of luck, but when we're prepared for when that luck actually comes to fruition, and we prepared ourselves with that, I mean, that's the advice I'll tell my son for
Very
decades to come. And sir, I'm
Great to be
super
with you.
grateful.
Thanks. Semper
Yes,
Fi.
Semper Fi. I'm super grateful for you, sir. Thank you for your time. If you haven't picked up the book Conflict, go pick up the book Conflict if you're listening out there. Sir, I'm looking forward to what's next for you. And I am grateful for your time. Thank you for being here. And thank you all for tuning in to the Through the Storm podcast. Sir, I'll give you the last word. Anything else?
Yeah, the next book is going to be From Battlefield to High Command. And it's about the very small number of combat commanders who were very good in individual battles, and then actually as the strategic leader for an overall war or conflict, proved equal to the task of strategic leadership. Again, particularly getting the big ideas right, that all important first task for the leader at the very top. And that'll be fun as well. Great to
When's
be
that
with
one
you.
coming out, sir?
Well, it's just roughed out right now. In fact, we're still working on the second edition of Conflict, which will come out this fall. And then so I'll tackle it once that particular book tour is over. And I still have a day job, obviously, at KKR, so I got
Me too.
periodically as well.
Yeah, grateful for you, sir. Thank you for tuning in, y'all, and we'll see you next time.